This podcast is brought to you by the School of Advanced Study, University of London.
Okay, so good afternoon everyone. I'd just like to thank the organisers for inviting me to speak today. My background is in media and communications, particularly in discourse analysis and mainly analysis of news discourse around conflict. So at one point I developed an interest in memory studies, particularly in the Spanish context, and then also I did some work on anti-austerity protests in Spain. So that led to this kind of mixed paper, which comes from combining those two strands, which I will talk about today. So this image that you see here, those are Spanish Republican flags that we call tricolor flags, which are the red, yellow, purple, which is not the red, yellow, red, which is the official Spanish flag at the moment. That flag was the official flag during the Republic in the 1930s in Spain, during the Second Republic. And of course it was substituted again in 1936 when the Civil War started, and since then it's not been official. So just to be clear, I am not talking about the use of Republican flags in demonstrations about demanding a republic. Like for example in June this year, there were pro-republic, anti-monarchy demonstrations when the king announced that he was going to abdicate. So that's not the kind of demonstration that I'm talking about when people went out to the streets to demand that there would be a referendum. So I'm talking about anti-austerity protests where the flag symbolizes not necessarily that they want to demand a referendum to make that decision, but it symbolizes a series of other things that I'm going to discuss here. So in this paper, I am applying the concept of cultural memory to examine some of the ways in which Spain's history is remembered and how political identities and demands of the Protestants are partly shaped by a selective understanding of Spanish history. The significance of cultural memory in demonstrations in Spain, including anti-austerity protests, is noticeable in a range of mottos and symbols which are typically visible in these sort of events. So focusing particularly on the use of the Spanish Republican flag, I argue that the definition of some activist perspectives is based on a process of selective memory, which is characterized by a form of historical discontinuity by which we remember certain things of that history, but we don't remember other aspects of it. So the social, political and economic problems that affect Spain today were already in existence before the crisis. The crisis began in 2008. Nevertheless, the neoliberal policies of austerity adopted in the European Union have intensified the already existing deficiencies of the Spanish economic system, such as the real estate bubble, high unemployment rates, a weak production system, precarious working conditions, etc. In short, austerity measures have further increased the unequal concentration of power and disposable income between citizens. And of course, what I'm describing here is not exclusive of the Spanish context. However, if we consider these negative socioeconomic developments, the argument that activists present in that democracy is not it's that democracy as a term is not really appropriate to describe the political system that we have at the moment. Home evictions, police brutality in demonstrations, poorer health and education services are only some indicators of the worsening living conditions in Spain at the moment. Activists argue that a representative system that perpetuates the accumulation of wealth in a few hands is indicative of a political arrangement which is closely linked to private economic interests. Therefore, this system, which uses inequality as a basic tool of social control, cannot provide the equal social rights that should be guaranteed in a democracy. Again, that's not exclusive of the Spanish context. However, Even though anti-austerity measures are dictated by the European Union and then they are applied by national governments, any doubts that arise in Spain regarding the quality of the democratic system are deeply connected to the memory of Franco's dictatorship, which is very much a memory which is still alive. In her article in The Guardian in 2012, Catherine Enger summarizes this point when she argues that the Spanish people still retain the memory of the Franco years and the understanding that democracy is something that you have to defend because it is something that you can lose. Defending this democracy is precisely what the Spanish people are doing when they engage in anti-austerity initiatives, such as the Indignados movement of 2011 and afterwards. So just to contextualize this discussion a little bit, memory studies have gained much attention in Spain in recent years, in the last 10-15 years. It wasn't really there before. And it was thanks to those who have stressed the need to confront the issues that remain unresolved after Franco's death in 1975, such as the search and exhumation of bodies, tracing the fate of stolen babies, bringing justice to the victims of Franco, etc. Today, Spain is still very much infused with the legacies of the events that took place between the beginning of the Civil War until the transition in the 1980s. In this context, memory constitutes a site of political struggle, where the old divisions and clashes of the Civil War and the dictatorship continue to unfold today. The key to understand the current memory debate in Spain is in the events that unfolded after the military coup of 1936, which brought the democratically established Second Republic to an end. This coup immersed the country in a civil war, during which thousands of people from all different ideologies lost their lives. When the war ended in 1939 and Franco took power, Franco's dead were given proper burial. They were able to mourn their dead. They were able to move forward from that. However, their opponents, who were broadly labeled as rojos, the Reds, suffered imprisonment, torture, internment in concentration camps, and all too often death. After which they were buried in mass graves, usually in unknown locations. In short, Franco's enemies were not allowed to find closure, and moreover, they continued to be persecuted long after the end of the war. And this is the reason why we could argue that the Civil War only ended in 1939 for the winners, but it still continued afterwards through the application of tireless repressive measures throughout the regime, Franco's regime. Furthermore, just to make things easier for them, even just to improve it for them a little bit more, when Franco died in 1975, the political elites of the dictatorship decided that the most efficient way to move forward would be to declare an amnesty for those who committed crimes during the dictatorship. This was part of the agreed Pact of Silence, or Pact of Forgetting, or Pacto del Olvido, through which Spain's recent history was to be forgotten in the interest of developing a stable democratic system. In relation to political backgrounds, we know that there are two options that we could pursue in order to achieve a democratic consolidation in this kind of context. You either offer justice to the victims and punish the culprits, or you forgive the perpetrators and you forget the past. So in Spain, the implementation of the second option effectively meant that the silence imposed during the dictatorship was extended long after the dictator's death. There are many people who are still scared to talk about this. So, as we know, memory studies refers to the metaphorical transference of the individual cognitive ability to remember to a social or collective level. Here I am using the concept of cultural memory, which according to Earl sees culture as patterns of publicly available symbols objectified in society. These objectified symbols are made publicly available through the media, institutions, and other social practices, and they are recognizable within the national and cultural contexts within which they occur. These symbols become carriers of memory that serve to bring the past into the present. So, for example, the Spanish Republican flag, though unofficial, is publicly available and it is recognized as a symbol of the Second Republic by everybody, whether you agree or disagree with it, but everybody can recognize it when they say it. The concept of cultural memory, in other words, is not concerned with a specific event that was experienced collectively at one moment in time. That would be collective memory or some variation of that, but refers to memories that have been inherited or carried over a period of time which help to reconstruct the past. And I'm using reconstruct deliberately to talk about what the reason why I've called this paper selective memories, which if we build on that kind of metaphorical use of the individual memory as a social memory, here we're talking about, or what I'm trying to say is that in the same way that individuals can choose to remember what is convenient in certain circumstances, well, perhaps something similar happens when it comes to these movements and choosing to remember certain aspects of the history of the Republic, but not other aspects of that history. So when I've been to several anti-austerity protests in the last 2 or 3 years in Spain, I went to protesters who were waving the Republican flag, and I asked them, why do you wave that flag? I can imagine why, but I wanted to know it from them. And these are some of the answers that I used to get when I used to ask these protesters. The Republican flag represents a series of equalities and social rights that we do not have in Spain. The flag symbolizes social change and the search for equality. It's the achievement of democratic equality, and it's not just formal democracy, but participative and economic democracy with an equal share of resources. These are the things that they tell you when you ask them what it represents to them. The Republic of 1931 was a republic of the workers of all types. It was not sectarian, so it was a project of solidarity. And then also, today in Spain, this flag is the strongest symbol of the left. That last statement, which is questionable, really, but just to contextualize that a little bit, that was somebody in a demonstration in Barcelona, and what he was trying to say is that it's a stronger symbol of the left than the Catalan independence flag. So he was kind of making a statement in that sense as well. So these responses help us to understand the articulation of some activists of the political demands that they make on anti-austerity demonstrations. According to these participants, as you can see, the Republican flag represents a left-wing political stance that does not, which not only seeks to rid the country of the monarchy, but also signals a desire to achieve social equality. What is also evident is the emphasis that is placed on the need to move away from a deficient political model that fails to deliver equal opportunities and resources for everyone. In the context of demonstrations that challenge the system, it is clear that the Republican flag, as opposed to the official Spanish one, is used as a symbolic expression of dissent. The flag embodies, all in all, a critical view of the contemporary Spanish system, a view which includes and is based on a reflexive assessment of the past, together with the formulation of future-oriented demands that are expressed in those contemporary demonstrations. Now, to comprehend the construction of this symbol as it is understood by these participants, we need to bear in mind that the Republic of 1931 was a democratic system that was eventually overthrown after a 3-year war and the imposition of an authoritarian regime. And this is the reason why the Republic remains the legitimate state formation that should be in place today. Of course, the fact that Franco decided that upon his death there should be a monarchy didn't really help, because it was a decision made by Franco, not something that was decided by the Spanish people. So both the violent overthrow of the Republic and the way in which the transition was implemented are two well-documented, recognized historical facts which have nevertheless led to wide misconceptions about the Republic and the social, economic and political issues that characterized those years. What these pro-Republican stances seem to ignore is the socio-economic conditions in which the Spanish people lived during the Second Republic. Class divisions, poor working conditions and the scarcity of resources were widespread in the 1930s, even before the war. My actual bigger project on memory is based on recovering oral testimonies from people who lived through this period in a village in southern Spain. And one theme that emerges every single time is how hungry they were at that time, how they couldn't actually access proper education, how they couldn't access proper health care. If you read on this topic, you see that a peasant would go to work early in the morning, come back at night, and he wouldn't have enough money at the end of the day to buy a loaf of bread for his family. So that kind of illustrates the conditions in which many people lived through this period. The Republic did, to a certain extent, attempt to address these issues. They did invest in education. They tried to develop this agrarian reform, which did something to a certain extent, but it was quite moderate. And they did grant equal voting rights to women. And those are some of the initiatives that indicate the program of social justice that underpinned the Republic, particularly when the left was in charge. However, the overall effectiveness of the changes that they implemented was considered by many to be rather moderate, particularly among those sectors that expected deeper structural changes. Class divisions were indeed at the heart of the unrest that existed in Spain in the 1930s. Long working hours, hunger, and the inability to afford healthcare, as I've just mentioned, are at the center of people's testimonies about this period. The middle-class politicians who led the course of the Republic were unable or unwilling to enforce the necessary changes that would set the foundations for long-lasting socio-economic democracy and the improvement of Spanish people's quality of life. And of course, the fact that they only had 5 years to do this, and then they had to deal with this coup and the war, didn't help either. In addition, it is particularly relevant to consider the social revolts that took place during the Republic. They were led by workers who sought to change the exploitative conditions that they endured during their lives and the work environment. So there were famous revolts like the one in Casas Viejas in 1933 and the 1934 revolution in Asturias and other parts of Spain, which were violently repressed by Republican authorities. So those two events and other similar revolts also remind us of the violent repression that was executed by the officials of the Republic to put an end to the workers' uprisings. So yet, despite the history of repression, political unrest, socio-economic inequalities, the Republic has become a mythical standard for civil and democratic rights. The mythical embodiment of a democratic ideal in the Republican flag is explained by a discontinuity in the cultural memory of the Spanish Second Republic and the Civil War. As a result, the well-documented instances of repression and social problems during the Republic seem to be forgotten by those who look to the Republic as a preferred political system. This continuity must be understood by considering the combination of three key aspects, I believe. First of all, it's a rejection of a relatively recent past, which is Franco's dictatorship, but also the rejection of the principles and decisions that drove the so-called transition to democracy, and also the rejection of contemporary neoliberal system that generates further inequalities. In the Spanish context, the combination of these three aspects helps with the formation of the myth of the Republic, as attention is placed on the democratic period that existed between two authoritarian regimes, the Primo de Rivera's regime before the Republic, and then Franco's dictatorship. And the fact that the Civil War started during the Republic and led to its end adds further political and social significance to this period due to the mark that the conflict has left in the psyche of the country. This is therefore a process which is profoundly determined by the perspective of historical hindsight. The use of historical elements to express dissent, such as defiende lo público, lucha por la república, defend that which is public, fight for the republic, indicates, alongside the use of the flag, that the Republican colors that symbolize the ideal system constitute that expression of dissent, and those usually link references to the dictatorship, for example, in the expression dictatorship of the markets, it's an authoritarian reference, and then the neoliberal context which we have now, or mottos such as they call it democracy, but it is not. So we see that conflation of the historical and contemporary issues. Now, just to conclude, that remarkable discontinuity offers opportunities and limitations. On the one hand, it enables people to understand those messages because they're culturally meaningful symbols that everybody can relate to. However, it also makes us lose it's a lost opportunity to get to know that period better. Those uprisings, those movements that happened in the 1930s, I'm not suggesting that we should go back exactly to that context. It's clearly a different kind of context. But there are opportunities to learn from what happened, from what went well, what didn't go so well, and that opportunity is lost because of that oversimplification of that memory. So I think I will leave it there. I think I may have run out of time. So thank you for listening.